Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the health management category. Super excited to be here with Francois. He's the CEO of Healint. Francois, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Hello, Kyle.
And so to kind of give the audience, again, perspective of why we're having this interview, we've looked at well over 400 plus companies within the health management category. And one of the companies that we're super excited about is Healint. Healint, what stood out to us was that the fact that they have a very unique focus, and they've built an incredible and impressive tool set to help a lot of patients overcome things like migraines. So we're going to jump a lot, and we're going to go into the details of how they do this. So before we end up doing that, Francois, you provided a great visual for us. We're going to jump into that first, and then we'll go back to questions. Sound good?
Good. Perfect
Great.
for me.
Pause. So Francois, thank you so much for the visual and a good baseline to help the audience have a better understanding of who is Healint and what are you guys doing. But before I jump into the actual specifics of the product itself, I wanted to understand a little bit more about what was the background about why you started this company.
It's a personal story, like many people in healthcare. So in 2012, my father had a second stroke, and I had been working in healthcare already for quite some time. At that point, I decided that I wanted to jump on the problem it was causing, and one of the key problems here was to be able to anticipate when it could happen again, as well as to anticipate if his state was improving or worsening. And the what became obvious to me at that time was that the IoT, the sensors, the smartphone was still something being totally underused and was on its way to becoming something massive to make a difference in the life of those patients and in the treatment of those patients. I was coming from the world of clinical trials. I had worked in multiple drugs in development in the field of cardiovascular, CNS, diabetes, and I thought, okay, I leave my comfortable jobs at a big pharma, and I launched. And the first year has really been about doing fundamental research to see how we could passively observe the state of the patients. And so I said, we started with stroke. I used it for myself, and I'm still using it to follow my father's evolution. But when thinking about the business, we had to take some detours, and when exploring the best options with for development and to make really a big difference with neurologists, they told us that migraine would also be something where they really needed help. We did explore stroke, spinal stenosis, epilepsy, and at some point they really told us, yeah, but we have those tons and tons of patients with migraine we cannot help. and you've built already that platform. Can you use it for migraine? And I knew something about migraine. Somebody else in the company also did knew about migraine, and we said, yeah, obviously, because migraine is really misunderstood. It's actually 12% of the world population, and it's coming far earlier in the life of people. And we thought, if we want to do serious predictives, AI, machine learning, at the time we were calling it machine learning, we need to have data, relevant data. And going into migraine also made sense there. Not only will we be able to help a billion of people, we will also be able to train massive models that we will be able to reuse in other diseases. That's how we went there. That's how we decided to focus on that disease which is not necessarily fancy, which is not necessarily the best to fundraise, because you know that VC people are mostly male and migraine is mostly women. But it's also something where we could have a massive success and be and grow to where we are.
Well, thank you. You know, I think it's always interesting, and especially within the healthcare industry, that a lot of times the basis of companies is it always starts with a personal story. And I'm really sorry to hear about your family member and what they had to go through. And you know, focusing on Healint, being a migraine and headache tracker is an understatement, I think. You're building a ton of features on top of a problem that, as you already mentioned, is huge. 12% of the population has this problem. So you're helping a lot of these individuals find track patterns. I mean, you're crowdsourcing learnings, you're predicting attacks, you're finding the best relief programs, you have coach plans, you have people could record their sleep, you could generate attack reports. There's a lot.
Yeah.
You kind of already mentioned it, but what was that big push to have your team focus on migraines first? I mean, you talked about how you went towards stroke, and you get a lot of feedback from neurologists about going into migraines. Was that the start?
So we considered carefully multiple conditions. And we went to discuss with neurologists, we went to discuss with patients, and we, in the end, we did what many startups do, is that we did a matrix simply, and we checked what would be the underserved places with a big need. So we went to check those elements, such as where will we be able to gather meaningful data, high quality data? Where will we be able to make something which is actually useful for the patient and for the doctor now, not in 10 years, now? Where is the need really underserved? So going in diabetes, for example, would have been, I would say, sorry, but probably not the best choice for us, because there was already tons of people in diabetes. And we checked also, where do we expect to see progress in terms of drug development? So with my background, I went to check the clinical trials, the state of the drugs coming on the market in the next 5 years. And we saw that there was a big need. We also considered technically, as I mentioned, where would we be able to train with features, because it's not the same to work on machine learning, unsupervised or supervised machine learning. When you have to make something which is helping the patient or the doctors in making choices on the long run, you will have it's far easier to do it with supervised learning. I know that unsupervised deep learning is far more fanciful, but in healthcare, I'd rather go to the FDA with supervised learning and be able to adjust that and to put more features with supervised learning. So that's also one thing that we wanted to do. The other part is we saw that the problem here is not just about the quantity of the data, it's also about the quality of the data. By quality, I don't mean that healthcare is wrong in terms of data, but I mean that in many cases, the data you gather is really incomplete in time. If you take the drug history of the patient, would you guess how much the doctors trust what they have in the medical records? What percentage of how often do they think that they can trust the medical records when it's about checking the drug history of their patients?
I would guess pretty high, but I feel like it's not.
It's 90% wrong. In 90% of the cases in the field of CNS, central nervous system, mental health and everything, the neurologists tell us in 90% of the cases, I know that what is written in that medical record is wrong. I cannot trust it. Why? Because first, the doctor is not necessarily passionate about data entry. He did not necessarily study that long to be somebody who's a pro of SNOMED or all those encoding and habits. And if he's arriving on NSAID and says he will just push here and he will not necessarily put that it was naproxen 10 milligrams after. That's one thing. The other point here is that the patient may be prescribed something, but do you know what happens after the prescription? Have you ever had that case where you took it at the pharmacy, but maybe you did not use it after? So what is in the medical record is what the patient was prescribed. It's not what he took. And that's also a big difference. And so we identified those problems which are potentially also completely making any predictives derail, but also making any natural intelligence decision go completely wrong because of the problem of information. And on migraine, we consider migraine, we consider epilepsy, we considered also something to which we are going, which is immunology. And we found that in those places, this information problem was massive. And with a good tracker, with the right motivations, we could make this work a lot better with a mix of information which are coming from the patient and from sensors from the environment.
Interesting. And actually that kind of leads into my next question, because you seem like you've taken a much more difficult route, which is building an application. I want to focus on the application right now for the consumer. Going direct to consumer with an application for them to manage their own health and keep track of it with supporting tools from your side. I mean, seems like it would be tough. I mean, it'd be tough to start with. It's important for probably the reasons why you mentioned. I mean, you're collecting the real and raw data that actually exists about what you probably weren't aware of without talking directly to the patient. But why did you go direct to consumer? Why did you build this application going direct to consumer? And how do you even acquire a lot of these individuals that want to be able to use your application?
So it's coming again from this belief that the first thing we needed in healthcare was better information. And that's coming from my background in clinical trials, where obviously the key challenge is actually gathering the right information at the right price, at the right speed, and from the right patients. So and 80% of the clinical trials actually are still late compared to the plan. So that probably pushed us also in thinking, okay, let's start by solving this one problem, getting something which is in the hands of the patient, allowing to understand the real world data, to gather it, but also to identify problems and clean it. Because over the past 7 years, we've learned a lot about the real world problem you have when you gather the data continuously from the patients. And so that was difficult, but that also has been a big reward, because we built this feedback loop and we've been able to help the patient directly. And what helped also here is not just my background in clinical trials, is also that, to be frank, I'm also very respectful of the gaming industry. When I was younger, my first job was a game tester. I worked for a company called Ubisoft. I was still in high school, and I was spending hours and hours in trying to break the games, and I was paid for that. That was extremely boring, but I could see how the games were evolving from the initial stage, and how the real hard work with that. And after that, I went to Japan, where I could also discover more about the gaming industry while I was developing drugs. And here, that a lot of that came back to our face, which is, we first need to build something that people want to use, and not be thinking like the traditional clinical trials, where it's about thinking the patient will just do what the doctor will tell them to do. Because, that works to a certain limit. It's the same as doing your homework during the summer. Why do I take the example of the summer? Is because we're in a field where this is specialist, and you go and see those specialists every 3 months. What happened to you when you had to spend the summer and you had this summer work to do, summer homework to do? At first you think, okay, I will do it. And next, you start to have fun and forget about it. And whoops, September arrives and you feel guilty. And you have a bit of that phenomenon happening in the relation with the specialist, and we needed to break that, because one of the worst things you can create is stress for the patient. So we had to go into the psychology and make a tool that we want to use ourselves, that everybody in the team is using, that the patients will want to use, and that the doctors will be happy with, because it will be helpful for them. And once we had found that balance, we had solved already the biggest thing, which is actually even bigger, more difficult in my experience than running a 3,000 patient clinical study where you spend 100 million on it. Because it's not about saying, I give you money, you do that. I give you those stuff to fill in every day and you do it. It's about creating motivation for the people to do it. And everybody who has children understand the difference and how difficult it can be.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I mean, it's building an application that a lot of individuals want to use and feel excited and motivated to use, especially when managing their health, I think is a really tough problem. And it's incredible to see your application and how you've engaged with your users that have really big problem. I'm curious, for a lot of the patients or consumers that are using the application, what kind of patients are they? What type of consumers are they? What are they normally struggling with? I mean, basically, yes, we understand it's migraines and headaches, but do they fit into a specific set of profile for a lot of the users of your application?
Absolutely. And we had to choose. The semantic can be very, very dangerous when talking about disease, because you can have one name for one disease, but it's so big that in that you have many subsegments of patients, many different persona. And if you go to address everybody at the same time, that's as deadly as saying, I will do something for the young people. No, even young people are not all the same. All millennials are not the same, despite what some people tend to write in magazines or websites. And that's the same, migraineurs, diabetics patients, cancer patients, they are not all the same. And so the first thing we had to do was really to think about, within that massive population of 1 billion potential patients, who will we go first to support? And so we started with patients who are higher chronicity, thinking of the business model that we will be able to push, and the fact that we wanted to be involved in clinical trials very fast. Why? Because you had new treatments coming for the higher chronicity patients. And what I mean by high chronicity, that's patients who can have between 4 migraine days a month to 30 migraine days a month. And the migraine is not a headache. Huh? It's a lot more symptoms. It's the hypersensitivity of your brain. You can be extremely sensitive to the light. You can be vomiting. You can be nausea. You cannot sometimes not even stand. You can be half paralyzed. That's really tough. So we went for those who are in that very complex, difficult case, who will need to communicate with their doctors. And progressively we expanded in there, considering the different treatments, the different objectives of the patients. So that's a little bit like starting with the diabetes type 2 patients who are at risk of loss of controls of their insulin. Who've tried already metformin and 2 other drugs to control their insulin levels, and who've put a pump. That's being specific like that. And then after you can expand into other subsegments. But it's, as I said, whatever the disease, if this is a broad disease, you have to be very careful that even if there is one big label, you have to go for sub-labels which are smaller. And in the same way that you've had the 20 years ago, soon 20 years ago, a startup starting with Harvard, and then Ivy schools, Ivy League schools, and then expanding to more young people. And now it's reaching it's more than, it's in the billion number of users. Be the lead. We had to be the leader in that first sub-segment so that we could go in the other ones.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like you have a really complex challenge, because when individuals talk about headaches or migraines, it's a feels kind of a abstract definition, and I feel like it can have a lot of different subsets.
Yeah.
Which very, very interesting how you took that approach.
There's actually 200 types of headaches in the international classification.
Really? Wow.
And this classification is continuously evolving. And the last one took them more than 10 years to agree on the classification. Because one key thing also there, which makes it very interesting for machine learning, is that we don't know what is causing migraine. And neurologists tell us that we know more about the universe that we know about the brain, the human brain. So, and that fits also again very well with the objective of machine learning and being potentially using black box algorithms, because sometimes you have to solve a problem without understanding how it works.
Well, you know, going back to the application itself, because you have a lot of unique features. One, the basic level, you're helping a lot of individuals record their issues with their health. On top of that, you're even going as far as being able to predict risks or even anticipate attacks.
Yeah.
And maybe even sometimes you even also help a lot of individuals find what is the best relief for their issue that they're having. Where do you find this data? How do you build up this data set? Where do you find, how did you build out that functionality to understand that workflow? And then also provide a recommendation tool on top. I mean, this is seems like a very complex space, hard to understand, sometimes very abstract, and even hard to explain what you might even be feeling. And so how did you manage to break this apart?
So it's really it's a never-ending problem. We have to test, improve. It's like a startup. We have to test, improve, test, improve, test, improve. And it's a combination of input. So you can take the voice patterns that will work in some cases as a way to reveal that you're in pain. That will work in some cases as a way to reveal that you have other problems. You can observe the eye. You can observe characteristics on the face in the same way that some people manage to see the variation in a heart rate based on the change in the color in the red channel in a video of you. And so that's the same principle for migraine. It's about observing those subtle signs and combination of signs that you will have and progressively narrowing it down to find what is actually potentially the best solution, but also potentially the signs revealing that something is happening. So we have to be methodic. And we can discover things like the fact that before your migraine, during the 72 hours before, for you, you will be yawning a lot. Do I know why? No, I don't know. The way we discover it is by running experiments, observing, continuously gathering the data. We ask, and sometimes we discover things by chance, by discussing, by asking things we never ask, by saying, we found recently that many people were having handshaking. And we could see it in the senses of the phone. And that was, and initially we were thinking that it was due to the pain. And when we discussed a little bit more with them, we found cases where they were having the handshaking, but no pain anymore, because the pain was already hidden by that. So the approach we take is comparable to advertising in some way, online advertising. We gather the data, we set experiments, we see how it works, set hypotheses, we see how it works, and run and run and run and run again. It's a bit different from clinical trials in that, because clinical trials is about taking assumptions, focusing a lot on the methodology, doing it with very small samples of users, which are very, very carefully selected, and see if you have this hypothesis confirmed on this small sample of users. Here, it's about being able to reproduce that on very big sample of users, see to what extent it's true in the different distribution, in the distribution of the users, because it will not be true in the same way for everybody. And then adjust the different methods to subsamples of users. That's why today we are launching a 10 million patient registry, and so that after we are able to run continuously more and more experiments on some sample of users. Even yawning, as I was mentioning, you can, depending on the person, you can be more or less yawning, more often, more strongly. Can be starting 72 hours for you. It can be starting 3 hours ahead of the attack for others. So we are running continuously those observations, and the fact that today we have already 2.5 million users is making a difference.
Well, I'm curious. I want to get into that patient registry that you talked about. Before I get into that, though, I have 2 questions to follow up. You know, when you talk about predicting attacks or predicting, you know, issues that might arise, in your case, when a lot of the data is input directly by the user itself, how are you able to detect that? Are you, in this case, reaching out on a daily basis or weekly basis and asking users to input information that might be an indicator based on the previous information that they've submitted that could lead to an attack, and then from that provide a warning? Or is there already a notification on their phone when they wake up saying, hey, you might have a headache right now, it could be pretty bad, or, you know, other issues?
Today will be a nightmare. That's actually a very tough ethical question, and that's not just migraine. If I tell you before a stroke attack, if I tell you before a stroke epilepsy or a migraine epilepsy that you will get it, what is it causing? In many people, it's causing stress. And the stress is actually usually a factor in increasing the risk of having it. So one of the key points we had to solve, the first time we did those predictions in 2014, we had to think about ethically what happens. So the one thing we decided to do was to start developing methods to help the patient in relaxing, in reducing their stress level, in case we are announcing that the attack is coming. And one thing we've been waiting for was also drugs that you could take before the attack is starting. And that happened this year. So we had to wait for quite some time.
Wow.
We knew it was in development. And so, because just to share, and that's not specific to migraine again, is any drug has side effects. And one specifically nasty side effect that you can have in all the drugs touching with your brain is that your brain gets used to it. If your brain gets used to a drug, it can actually create the problem to get it again when you stop taking it. So in the case of migraine, if you take too much of the drugs meant to stop the attack, you can get your brain to create the attack. And that's called, for example, rebound headaches. So it's a huge, huge responsibility when you announce that the patient may have an attack. And in some cases, it can fall into the medical device. So in our case, what we did is we started with a subsegment of patients who are conscious of their own signs. The weather, patients who consider that they're impacted by the weather, and we worked on tools to help them in anticipating by assisting them in evaluating their sensitivity to the weather and how the weather is changing. And others is patients who have prodromes like yawning. In my case, before migraine, for example, I'm super energetic, like Steve Ballmer. You know Steve Ballmer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we help the person in learning about their signs so that they can take the decision by themselves and we're not an external source of stress. And what comes in the future is more and more and more of those tools. That's the same thing as the self-driving car. You have to go through those steps in between. You cannot make it totally automatic immediately because you have people's lives at stake. But you can use the artificial intelligence and the machine learning to help the persons in taking decisions. And what we do differently from others is that we think that it's very important to help the patients in taking decisions and not just help the doctors in taking the decisions for the patients.
Really interesting. Really interesting. This is one of the things that's very difficult, but just generally difficult about a lot of healthcare applications, and specifically for health management, is even if you might try to solve a problem, it can have different types of repercussions that you may have never even noticed until you've gone to that route. So it's really interesting how you've kind of worked your way through some of those unique problems. I know we got a little bit of time left, but there's a few more questions because I want to highlight some more important things. Going back to your patient registry, 10 million patients, and this is all from individuals. To start with, yeah, it's going to be even bigger. I mean, you have to. Earlier, we talked about 12% of the population with just in this problem category alone, but a lot of this information is generated from users using your application, the migraine and headache health tracker, right? And I'm curious, can you talk about the purpose of why you're building this registry and the data that you collect? I mean, you've already kind of highlighted that before, but the data that you're collecting and what are you using this for?
It's a very good question. It's so obvious to me that I do not have a good comparison in mind, but it's basically the same as building Google, for example. It's about building this base of knowledge. It's actually a mix. It's once you have this continuous registry, this 10 million patient registry here running, what is happening? You have data which is normalized. You have patients who are engaged, who have continuously improving outcome, and you have millions and even more billions of observations of interventions with their outcome. You can predict, you can test, you can adjust. And you can also help in changing the way the outcome of drugs is being measured. You can start comparing the drugs versus each other's, which is, you may be surprised, not done by traditional clinical trials, because traditional clinical trials is not comparing drugs to each other's. It's comparing the new drug to the reference drug, to one reference drug. So that's really the piece which is missing to be able to go for precision medicine. To change from a world where to find the right treatment for you, you have to try 1, 2, 3, 4 treatments until you find the right one, or until your insurance is reimbursing you. And if you're able to build those patterns, which are using not just the input, but a combination of data, you're in position to go for these adjustments, which will be telling, okay, for this attack, for this moment, for the state of your immune system now, for the state of your brain now, this is the treatment you should take. And why do we know that this is the right one? Because there is the predictives, and those predictives are continuously compared to the ground truth. It's not based on a clinical study which has been finished years ago and which is not evolving in the real world. This is based on the ground truth, which is continuously trained and improved. Like, again, self-driving cars. It needs to be continuously trained. So our belief is that really the healthcare and the self-driving car, it has a lot in common. It's about ensuring the safety of people. So we're facing very difficult problems, but it's also something which needs to be continuously tested and improved, because the world is also changing. And so by building this 10 million patient registry, we're building a test bed for ground truth also. And that's what we believe is the only way to get things to move to the next step.
Yeah, especially for the category that you're in, having to go a route that is probably the hardest route, building an application that users enjoy to use, that can really help them in their daily life, and then being able to do that at scale so you have enough users to actually make it valuable where you can help all of them in the future find that right treatment therapy. And it seems like, taking this information, you're doing your best to figure out, working with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and it seems like you're building a variety of different applications on the back end to help pharmaceutical companies understand the data that you have, how to connect with a lot of different users, what is the result of their medications. It's really interesting. I mean, you have a handful of tools around clinical trials. You have some health analytics solutions. You have some media campaign accelerators. Did you want to talk about any of those at all?
The key points here really, and what we see growing the most, is everything which is related to measuring and using the platform for virtual clinical trial. That really exploded also with the COVID-19, because with this engagement, with the continuous gathering of baseline data, we now manage to help companies in being faster than ever. And the patients are already tracking, so you don't have to ask them to start tracking with another app specific to your clinical trial. And the other part that we see exploding is really everything which is about helping the patient in taking action with or without drug treatments or medical devices. And we have thousands of patients who've started coaching either with totally automated coaching or with human support. And we have employers in Europe, in the US, soon in Japan, who are also starting to say, okay, it's not just about reimbursing the drugs. I also want to give some coaching to the patients. And that coaching is far more efficient when you also are able to see how the patient is evolving.
Yeah, interesting. And I know we're close to the end of time here, so I have two more questions for you. It seems like you implied the future product roadmap is actually kind of defined by the gaps of, diseases or health issues that are actually going to be a lot of clinical trials are trying to target, but probably don't have an underlying base of data. And do you actually have plans of moving outside of the migraine space and in other chronic conditions? And is that going to also be defined by, the gaps that you might find in clinical trials as well?
Absolutely. We started with expanding with migraine, but from scratch, the platform was developed to be able to go far beyond that. And for us, migraine is a bit like a first city, and many of those users that we are helping today, first they have comorbidities. 60% to 70% of the patients with migraine have comorbidities. It's why is that? It's because it's impacting the immune system, it's impacting mental health, it's related with other problems like, for example, multiple sclerosis. And so we started already working on those other diseases with those patients. And that makes total sense also because in terms of development, what happens in the drug developments also is that when you start attacking some targets, like monoclonal antibodies going for the anti-TNF alpha or other parts of your body mechanisms, you find other nearby targets, and that fits with the comorbidities of the patients. So we already started working on pain. Makes sense. We've developed know-how in that field. Pain specialists know us. And within the pain, we're attacking elements which are related to the central nervous system and to the immune system. For example, your immune system can be attacking your spine, and it's generating lots of low back pain. And here we can help the patient in finding it while it's still time to take actions and to avoid from being paralyzed. We're working on fibromyalgia, on rheumatoid arthritis, on many other diseases where you have also very interesting developments coming.
Really interesting. It's exciting to see your product roadmap because it seems your approach, especially within the migraine space, has been incredible. And not only from the patient level, but how you built up the patient registry, and then also how you're helping, a lot of different healthcare stakeholders understand these problems in a much deeper way. Last question that I have for you, because I know we're over time, so I appreciate you taking a little extra time with me. What do you think is the future of, either chronic care management generally or migraine care management? Mm-hmm. And what do you see that most people don't?
So it's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult questions because during the past 20 years, I've seen many trends announced and never coming to life or being still progressing very, very slowly. What seems obvious is that healthcare will continue to be very slow to evolve because it's not just very expensive, it's also about dealing with ethical aspects. What I firmly believe is that it will be more and more in the hands of the patients, us, you, everybody. And that needs to be. We cannot continue to have something where the center is not the patient. And we want to be there to help that in happening. Because today, the center of the healthcare system, and since the previous century, is the doctor. And many products today are still developed with that state of mind that as soon as the product is prescribed, we don't care about what is happening after. So we don't really need a patient, we need a prescription. So that's really the big thing that we need to change. I cannot say that I'm the only one to see it, because I believe we should all be hoping for that. The other point is that precision medicine is a word today. It's not really applied, and that needs to come. And treatments, clinical trials need to change in the way they are done. They need to become shorter. They need to be about smaller targets and going into the real world faster. That will only be feasible with huge amounts of baseline data. That will only be feasible by really changing the way all of those predictions are done. And that will also be feasible once we're ready to stop and take away those treatments faster. So the full economics of financing of new drugs and new medical devices need to change with that too. Because today we're in a world where developing a new drug, developing a new treatment is taking billions. And if we don't do enough, if we don't change that, even digital therapeutics is taking that route, which makes no sense. Because if we go for something which is so massively expensive for anything before it's touching the human in the real world, we create a world where the part about marketing and pushing it becomes also far too expensive. We need to have something which is a bit more like the startups, where everything can be evaluated faster, earlier, so that new ideas, new solutions can emerge faster too. And that trend will take a long, long time because it requires to change the economics, the risk evaluation, even the statistical methods which are being used. But you have crazy people like us who are here to fight and to make that change. And keep in mind that when you go on Mars, you will have to have changed that, right? We will not be exporting our clinical trials to Mars. It will be about smaller populations. And the big problem they will have will not be diabetes and cardiovascular. It will be mental. It will be immune system. That's it.
No, it's an incredible, perspective. I think that was well put. With that, Francois, I mean, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for going a little bit over time. Before I go to closing remarks, is there anything that you want to announce to the audience? Any asks, anything that you want to announce at all, or recap of Healint?
So thank you for being here. Thank you for the wonderful questions. If anybody wants to help us in going not to 10 million, but to 100 million patient registry now, please contact me. I'm very interested. Again, here, this is about taking the control over not just our brain, but also our quality of life, our immune system, and everything which can be related to that. It's about changing the economics of healthcare in the end and making, again, a better world for all of us. And not just living longer, but living better. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, with that, this was a fantastic interview. I really appreciate the time. The audience, again, we looked at well over 400 companies in the health management space. There's a reason why Healint is one of the best companies within this category, and why at least we're excited about it. And you got to hear about it today. I mean, Francois is taking the hardest route, going direct to consumer, building out an application people actually enjoy to use to track their health, but getting the most important data and keeping track of that and collecting it in real time and having that evolve continuously over time. You have 2.5 million people using it today, actively. a registry of almost 10 million people. Now being able to take that information and leverage it in a big way to help a lot of individuals find the right therapeutic products or solutions that would help them improve their migraines, improve their health, improve the future chronic conditions that you might address in the future. So this is fantastic. Healint, this is the reasons why we thought Healint was one of the best companies within this category. So thanks again, Francois, for doing this. This was incredible. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cal.